The topic is ramping SaaS revenue for proven strategies for startups that are in Series A, Series B. Myself, John Helena, I'm the founder of CRM Assist. I do consulting for different CRM platforms, and so I can build out your CRM platform, Salesforce, HubSpot, Pipedrive, Zoho, to support what Mike's going to talk about today.
Great, thanks, John. And Mike Conti, I am a fractional CRO, go-to-market architect, specialist. I'm a veteran of 6 startups. 2 were from scratch to IPO. 4 were from what I'll call angel or A round to successful exit. I also have extensive experience at a couple of large tech companies where I've also applied some of what I'm going to talk about today with great success and results. So ramping up SaaS companies from Series A, Series B to scale is not easy and not for the faint of heart. At the end of the day, basically, you've got to figure out a go-to-market. You've got to validate that go-to-market. You have to operationalize it and then scale it. And to do that, you have to get a lot of things right. You don't have to get them perfect, but you have to get them right. And more importantly, what I mean by right is you have to get them aligned so that they work together and so that you can enable them for scale. So most of you are either founders, or you work with founders, or you work with early stage companies, or you work in a Series A, Series B company, or with those folks. And if you work with founders, you know that they're unique individuals. They're brilliant. They tend to be innovators. They are innovators. They're logical. They're linear, and they're intuitive. Those are some of the things that I've noticed are characteristics of founders across all the different companies I work for. I also noticed that those wonderful characteristics that they have that allow them to build brilliant innovation sometimes gets in their way when they try to build a go-to-market. And the reason is that go-to-market is the exact opposite of the characteristics and traits they generally carry. Go-to-market is nonlinear, it's counterintuitive, and generally it's built to stir emotion. And so it is not the easiest thing in the world to get a founder to understand completely why you have to do things a certain way. But if you're going to get them on board, you have to have the logic and you have to be able to explain it in a way that makes sense to them. And that's what we're going to cover today. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with this concept. It comes from the book Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey Moore. And this one graphic has a lot to do with the traps we're going to talk about that founders fall into and early stage companies fall into. Those first 2 little yellow and green bars on the left are before the chasm. They are that market. Those people are innovators and early adopters. It's 15% of the market. You remember what I said about founders? They tend to be innovators. The innovator portion is 2% of the market. So intuitively to an innovator, they would go to market focused on the product. Because if you talk to innovators, they want to see a product and they're going to figure out how to apply it and how to use it and what problems it can solve, right? That's 2% of the market. The other 98% of the market does the exact opposite. They have a problem and they look at technology to understand how to apply it. And so what's natural to a founder is often not what's going to appeal to most of the market that they're trying to go to. The other truth about the chasm, what is the chasm? It's that canyon that doesn't get crossed by early stage companies, startup companies, companies that bring disruptive technology to market. Innovators and early adopters buy that technology. The rest of the market does not. The rest of the market are the early majority, late majority resistors and laggards. They wait until the solution is established and known before they buy. And so one of the difficulties that early stage companies have is to realization that only 15% of the market is truly my market. How do I get that market? How do I get leads from those people? How do I sell to that market? How do I make sure I spend my time and resources on that market? And so we're going to talk a lot about that today and some of the traps that founders and early stage companies fall into, because most of them, if you understand this one concept, you'll see the pitfalls that are easily fallen into and also how to avoid them. So think of it this way: 8.5 of every 10 potential prospects are not your buyer. So you have to appeal to the 1.5 that are. So let's look at some of the traps that we fall into in startups that create lack of efficiency, long ramp times, cash burns, the things that get in the way of success. The first trap I talk about is the product trap, right? What is the product trap? The product trap is simply going to market, marketing your product, right? Everybody says, well, what else would I market? And an innovative founder, that's going to be natural to market the product, to talk about the product. But innovators, well, early adopters certainly, which is 13 of that 15%, and even innovators in some cases, don't define problems in terms of solutions they don't know. So think about what I said earlier, where I'm coming to market with a brand new product. No one's heard of it. It doesn't take the approach that traditional products take. So buyers are thinking about a problem in terms of ways they would solve it, solutions they know, things they're doing now, other technologies in the market that address the problem. So going to market, trying to do demos and trying to do proof of concepts and get the product in, that's not going to be all that successful. You may get a couple, especially from friends and family, but you're not going to scale that way. What you want is a pipeline of leads from innovators and early adopters. So how do you do that? Well, what do innovators and early adopters like to do? They like to solve old problems new ways. And so you market and talk a lot about the new approach you take to an existing problem. This is going to create curiosity and interest in the segment that's most likely to buy from you. Now, that's critical because if you're getting leads from that segment, you're spending your precious resource on those buyers. And so your chances of ramp go up significantly. You're not spending your resources on the other 85% of the market that's not going to buy. You're not running around doing demos for people who don't define the problem the way you solve it. And so what happens if you demo a product to one of those folks, right? You're going to hear, "Oh, great product, cool technology. Boy, this is really, innovative." You're going to get compliments, and they're not going to do anything because in their minds they're thinking, "How am I going to use this? How do I how am I going to get the people to use it? How does this really solve my problem? That it looks more like a square peg they're trying to fit into a round hole." And so you're not going to get the buyer. And in some cases, you're going to spend your salespeople and marketing people are going to spend time trying to sell those folks, following up with them, trying to get them back on another demo. That's all going to lead to no revenue. And so that first trap is about knowing what to market, the problem. The second part of that is figuring out whether you are a new category or not. Now, to do that, you really need to have experienced people that understand the idea of new category versus existing category. Basically, if you find yourself using new terms, if your people, the customers, prospects need to do different things, execute different processes, chances are good you have a new category product. And if you have a new category product, you go to market a certain way around how you market that problem versus how you market if you're just what I'll call a better mousetrap, right? That's a little different market. Still focused on the problem because you still need the innovators and early adopters, but it's a little different approach to the marketplace. So that's the first trap that I talk a lot about when I work with founders and early stage companies. The second one I like to talk a lot about is the hiring trap. You don't want to hire prematurely. And so what do I mean by that? I mean, don't hire a group of people to figure it out. Because if you hire a group of people to figure it out, first of all, the odds that you're going to get a group of people that have the experience with enough startups to figure it out is low. Second of all, the fact that you have a group of people means you're going to get a lot of people with different ideas and opinions about how to do it. And while that's good, you find that most of them execute differently, and it's hard to get the boat being rowed in the same direction. So that's the second thing. The third part of this is fractional. Now, I do fractional work. John does. I have a network of people that know early stage marketing, early stage lead gen, early stage sales, right? You want that because those folks know how to go to market and are very likely to be able to work together, speak the same language, and get the boat rowing in the right direction. The other part of that is you're going to lay in the foundation for success. You're going to be able to prove the go to market on a small scale, and then you can start to think about your first hires. And we'll talk about who they should be in a little bit. One of the things people do when they hire early is they go, well, we got to have somebody who knows the space. No, you don't. And everybody says, what do you mean we don't? We have to have someone who understands the space we're in. Well, as an example, I've worked in 6 startups. 4 of them were in different spaces. I learned the space, I learned the technology, and we were successful bringing the technology to market, right? The key skill is the knowledge on how to bring disruptive technology to market. So how do you know when you have somebody like that? Well, they've worked in multiple startups. They've been successful in multiple spaces, bringing disruptive technology to market in all of those spaces. That's what you're looking for in your early sales hires, not necessarily someone who knows your space. You can teach them the space. It's really hard to teach them how to bring disruptive technology to market. The leads trap. This is another one where I get a lot of interesting comments. You talk to almost any founder, anyone in an early stage company, we need more leads, we need more leads, we need more leads. No, you don't. You need more of the right leads. You need leads from the innovators and early adopters. First of all, you don't have enough resources to chase a lot of leads. Second of all, if you're chasing a lot of leads from the other 85% of the market that's not going to buy from you, you're doing it at the expense of the 15% that will. And so your campaigns, your messaging, your go to market is focused on those 15%. And by the way, that 15% doesn't mean that you're going to sell to all small companies either. Large companies have innovators and early adopters spread throughout them. You have to find them. They tend to be at the executive levels in these companies, right? They got ahead because they took risk, they were innovative, they adopted early, right? And why do big companies have those people? And why do they let them spend? Because they want first mover advantage to deliver a business value. And so your marketing is after those people. And when you get them, there are a series of qualifying things you're going to do, which we'll talk about, to help you validate that they are, in fact, innovators and early adopters, and they're likely to buy. The other part of the leads trap is hiring your own SDRs. Don't do it. Why I say don't do it. An SDR's job today, especially in this market, in the early market, is to create conversation. It's not to get demos. You'll get the demos as a result of the right conversations. So you need SDRs that know how to market in the digital age. How do they do that? It's not emails and cold calls. That's not that they don't email and they don't cold call. It's part of the way a SDR should work in the market, right? But an SDR today needs to be building content that focuses on the problem, that's targeted at the ICP, that's personalized, that's across multi-channels with the specific purpose of starting a conversation. They have to become a part of your ICP's ecosystem. They join their LinkedIn groups, they comment on their social posts, right? And so to manage all of that as an early stage founder is a lot. And so I tend to recommend outsourcing that function early. And I like to outsource to someone who will allow me to hire that outsourced resource once they've been successful. And I'll talk later on about some options that you might have around that. The big network trap. Oh, I need to hire a sales guy who can get me a lot of meetings and who has a big network. And I always say, no, you don't. You have to hire a salesperson who can get you the right meetings, right? And so when I hear, oh, I'm looking for somebody with a Rolodex. When a founder or a CRO, an early stage company, says that to me, I cringe, and I cringe for the reasons which are clear that are going to lead to no success. And why? Well, if a salesperson has a big network, where'd they get it? They probably got it working for a very established company who sells to the 85% of the market that's not your buyer. So let's start with that. So who are they going to get meetings with? Those people. And what are you going to do? You're going to go on those meetings. And the majority of those people are not going to buy. Now, why do you have to resort to that? Primarily because no one's ever heard of you and your marketing's not generating the leads you need to get you the meetings that you want. And so by building the right marketing and using the right SDR resource, you're going to get those meetings. You're going to get them early. You're going to get more of them, and you're going to be able to start to ramp. And, we'll talk about how that impacts when you go for funding, how much funding you go for, because it does. When you sell to friends and family, that's good. That gets you some early stage customers, that gets you some revenue, but it does not get you market validation. They're buying you, they're buying your reputation. They're not buying the way a stranger would buy, the way the rest of the market would buy. That comes from a go-to-market that generates leads that follow into sales cycles that result in closed deals. And so the big network salesperson is not what you want. You want a salesperson who knows how to sell disruptive technology to early stage markets. They'll get you meetings. They're more likely to get you the right meetings. I'll go back, John. I have one more. So the marketing trap, right? Don't market the product. So when you go to market, you need a fractional marketing resource that can basically figure out three things. One, is this a new category or is this a existing category? Two, how do I bring a message to the market that's going to surface curiosity and interest in the innovators and early adopters? Then three, how do I work with a sales leader to refine and enable that messaging so that it becomes effective in moving sales forward? Those are the three things a marketing person early has to have. You're very likely to find that in a fractional resource. And that's where I would look in the early days. Okay, John, go ahead. The pro forma trap. Oh boy. This one is, not everyone falls victim to this, but I've seen a few that do, where, okay, we have a few customers, we need funding. We want this much funding. To get this much funding, we need this much revenue. Okay, so we're going to build a pro forma based upon how much funding we need. We're going to set that as the revenue objective, except that that's probably wrong. Probably not the right revenue objective, right? Because you can't set a revenue objective based on how much money you have to raise. You have to set a revenue objective based upon how much revenue you can produce. And investors will see through that in about 10 seconds. And they do. And you'll get a lot of interesting, this is, great technology, but they will not fund you. And a lot of them won't tell you why. Some will, most will not. So how do you build a pro forma? You build an operating plan. And this is part of why I talk about fractional resources. You're going to get a lot more bang for your buck with fractional resources, right? You're going to get a lot of things right that lets you build a pro forma and a pitch deck that an investor will believe, as opposed to, hey, if you give me all this money to spend, I'm going to spend it in a way that produces all that revenue. They will not believe you. What they are going to believe is an operational plan that explains how you're going to do that, supported by a budget that talks about revenue, expense, cash burn, funding, and so on. So building out a pro forma the right way is the best way to get funding. And sometimes you take it in stages. Sometimes you take more up front. It depends on the situation that you're in. And I can certainly talk to anyone that's interested on how to approach investors. Should you go to angels? Should you go to VC? Should you go to PE? Those are things that vary from situation to situation. So investors care about metrics, right? When they're thinking about funding, they are looking at, how big is the market? How much revenue can you do? What's the cost of customer acquisition? What's the size of the market? What's the CAGR? What are the margins? These are things that they want to see. They want to know What's the growth rate of the market? How much can you do with the resources? What's the scale? How high is the barrier to entry with what you have? There are a variety of things that go into the metrics that matter to the investor. So, for example, when you go to market or you go for funding, you don't want to have a high churn rate, right? You've got to figure out how not to have that. So if you have a few customers, you want to make sure you're keeping them. You also want to make sure you're upselling them, because if you get 5, 6, 7 customers, investors want to see that they're not only keeping your product, but they're buying more of your services to deploy that product across their organizations. They want to see your margins. They want to understand what scale does to your margins. And these are all things that you need to consider when you're building your pro forma. So when you're going to market and you're hiring salespeople, you want to build a repeatable sales motion. And that's not just in sales, because when you're early, sales is not just the salesperson. It's everybody. It's marketing. It's the founder. It's the sales leader. And in some cases, it's development and customer support. So that's the first part of it. That's where you hatch the sales function. You're going to compartmentalize and build process around that. But in the early days, you have to understand the pieces of work that have to happen to prosecute and execute a sales cycle. So early, founder has to be involved. There's no way to sell without the founder. However, you have to have the founder playing the right role in the sale. And this is where having a good fractional sales leader will help, because that person will learn the things they need to know from the founder. That person knows, I have to understand the founder's vision. I have to understand the way the founder sees the problem, the way the founder views the world, why the founder built the product the way they did, why it solves the problem in a way that others can't, what the value to the business is for that. That fractional sales leader has to know all of that. And it has to flow out of that salesperson's mouth just as easily as it flows out of the founder's mouth. And it takes a little bit of time and a lot of commitment to working with the founders to really understand the technology and the market and why they built it. That person is also going to be the person that communicates it to the new hires that you start to bring in when you scale. That person also has to work with marketing, and your fractional marketing person has to understand the same thing, because they have to build the collateral, the content, the enablement that's going to allow sales to present, have conversations around those subjects, and be able to create curiosity and interest in the marketplace. The founder is still going to get involved in the sale, because once you have the initial conversation, you're going to have to dig deeper into the technology. And the founder is the person who knows that, who's going to get involved in that, who's ultimately going to show the client the product, who's ultimately going to be the core source of credibility, backing up everything that the sales leader has told him, and reiterate what the sales leader has told them, and add to what the sales leader has told them, right? And so those two things are critical to figuring out how to build a repeatable sales motion. Once you have that, you have to start to define roles. So oftentimes the customer will say, well, this looks great and we want to prove it. Now they want to do a POC, except that the customer has no idea how to do a POC for your product. Why? Because they don't They've never tried to solve the problem the way you solve it. So you have to tell them how to do it. That takes a experienced person who's done that before and a founder who knows how to explain why we're going to set that up this way. And then when you get through that full prosecution of a cycle a few times, you're ready to start to organizationally build around it. And that's when you start to hire. So building that repeatable sales motion is a very precise and very important execution process, because without it, you can't ultimately scale. And so the first thing you've got to do to start that process is nail your ICP. Who is my ideal customer profile? Who am I going to sell to? What am I going to say to them? How do I get the process started, right? And so the first thing is the fit, right? What problem do I solve? Who has the problem? And you're going to go through a number of different conversations with different people in different organizations before you get to the real, like, sweet spot ICP, right? And that's normal, natural, and you want that. It's a good process to go through. Your messaging framework is going to evolve as you go through that process. It's going to become more clear, more honed in on the core problems, the core benefit, more honed in on the individuals you're most likely to have buy from the organizations you're selling to. You're going to understand the personas in the sale, what to say to those personas, how they impact one another, and ultimately how to sell to the organization. And then once you understand that, you'll be able to build a strategy from a channel standpoint. Early, it's direct, obviously, but it can very quickly evolve into resellers, partners, integrators, and other third-party sales arms. It can also segment itself out internally to, middle market, micro market, enterprise market, depending on what product you have and, how easy it is to sell, how packaged it is. So, if I can take a product and package it and make it very easy to learn, easy to use, easy to install, I may be able to sell that mostly remote on the phone, right? I may be able to do it to resellers. I may have a product that has an aspect of that and then a much bigger implementation on the back end. And so I might break out the product into multiple packages with multiple price points and sell those products through different channels. These are things you're figuring out early, and these are the things that fractional resources have the ability to help you understand. It also may drive product direction. You might say, if we can just make these few changes, we can take a piece of this product, have it install, have it deliver this value without a large sales effort, and then expand. So we might use a land and expand strategy. You might not be able to do that. There's all kinds of variations. And again, that's where experience will help you. Then once you've got all that, you need a sales framework. Now, this is a sales framework that I built specifically for early stage companies. Why did I build this? And this is a little bit of an eye chart. I'll explain it, the big parts of it. If anyone is interested, we can certainly set up a call about this and how it's built. But basically, at the very top, you see attention, interest, desire, conviction, risk assessment, and close. Those are the stages a buyer goes through in their decisioning process. Now, why is this so important? Because you're trying to move a buyer through that process. And you have to do things to move the buyer through that process. So when I looked at salespeople I was getting from large companies, they did not do this. They executed in the fourth box down called activities. They executed a lot of activities, and their manager managed and motivated on volume of activity, which is about the worst thing you could do in an early stage company, because it's not about the volume. First of all, you don't have the resources to execute the volume. Second of all, volume is going to sacrifice quality, and quality is what you're after. You have to hone in on those innovators and early adopters. You don't want a high activity that does not have impact. A lot of big companies run that way, right? They measure activity. And what's the definition of non-productivity? Activity without impact. They measure the activity, but they have no idea if it has impact. As a startup, you have no time, no money, and no resources to do that. And so that was the first reason I built this, right? Those activities are aligned to each one of those orange boxes, so that when you're executing an activity, it's with intent to move that prospect from one box to the next box. That's the only reason that you execute an activity, as opposed to what? Hey, let me do some outreach and schedule a demo. Well, demo is in the third box. I'm not curious. I'm not interested. I don't even know what you do, but I'm going to look at a demo. No, we're not doing that. Right? I don't have time for that. I need to get you curious. I need to have a conversation with you. I need to get the problem we solve understood. I need you to understand why we do it uniquely and what the benefit that is. And then I need you to be curious and interested enough to want a demo, which I'd be happy to give you. Right. So that's the one big reason why this process matters. Another reason why it matters is when you have salespeople who are executing the next best activity with the box below the activities, which are the resources, with the right resource, right? What happens? By definition, productivity has to go up and expense has to go down. I'm doing the next best thing to move the prospect along with the right resource. So when you're in an early stage company, you recognize how strapped that company is for resources. You can't waste them. So you have to make sure that you're using them properly. And so the alignment of the resources to the activities are critical for execution. When you think about a buyer and these stages, that's a salesperson's job, right? And when you hire your early salespeople, you're not going to get all salespeople who've got startup experience. But when you give them a framework like this, you kind of put guardrails and bumper rails on the sides of the road so they can't stray off too far. It also does something else. It takes their orientation away from the product and toward the problem. They start to think like the buyer. And when a salesperson thinks like the buyer, they have a lot more opportunity to be successful. They're more likely to do the right thing. They're more likely to create a better buyer's experience than if they are not trained that way. And most salespeople you're going to come across are not trained this way. They're trained to do as much activity as they can, get demos, get presentations, get meetings. It doesn't matter who they're with, just get them. that is not going to help you be successful in an early stage company. And so that's why this framework is so important. What John's done, thankfully, is built the templates for this that he can implement for you in HubSpot, in Salesforce, and in the other CRMs he's talked about. That's invaluable, because when you start with that level of automation, you're going to have a much better chance of success. Salespeople are interesting folks, right? If I give them an unautomated process that's correct and an incorrect process that's automated, they will use the incorrect automated process because it's automated. So, in order to get adoption, you need the automation to be there early days. And when it's there and it reinforces them, they get into good habits and they start to sell. The other interesting note I'll make about why I built this was I got a lot of interesting feedback from my top performers in some of the more established companies I had worked for earlier on in my career. And the feedback was, I hate the CRM. What was the number one answer I got to why they hated the CRM? That's not how I sell. And that's exactly right. The way their CRMs were set up were not set up based on the buyer. They were set up based on the sales-centric process of the seller. And the A players, the top performers, all knew how to sell, taking the buyer into consideration. So I started to watch what they did and thought about what I did when I sold. And I realized, my God, they're selling to these orange boxes. They're aligning their behaviors with these orange boxes. No wonder they're so successful. And that was exactly right. So when I implemented this, all my A players were like, this is great. They love the CRM. Everybody else was like, they needed a little bit of coaching and help. But when they understood why, they started to adopt it as well. So I'm a big proponent of this process, especially for early stage companies. And then there's an essential tech stack you should start with, right? One is the CRM, right? You've got to start with a CRM early for so many reasons. You don't want to lose the data. You don't want to lose the campaigns. You don't want to lose the leads, the follow-up. There's a lot of information that the CRM holds, but you also want to automate that sales process early. The second one is team collaboration, right? And I like Slack or chat or something that is going to be collaborative in nature that lets the team communicate with each other, right? Because you have to. The prospects and the company is moving at a very high speed, and in order to keep up with that high speed, you need to be able to collaborate, regularly. And so Slack or a Slack-like product becomes important. There's another product that I really like out in the market called Velocity Engine. Velocity Engine is probably the best application of AI I've seen, and it is an incredibly valuable product for an early stage company. What does it do? Well, you give VE input about your ICP and the kind of message you want to deliver. V goes out, looks at your website, looks at the internet on different topics around the subject areas you give them. It will build you a LinkedIn campaign, an email campaign. It'll build you a blog, an ebook, a white paper in a matter of hours. So it's all consistent with your website, your logos, your formats. Nobody would know it wasn't generated by you. It can be iterated. It can be changed. It can be used to target specific ICPs. This ability is fantastic for an early stage company trying to reach a specific audience. And so I really am a big proponent of you using that if you're building content early days. And then an outsourced SDR function. I particularly like the company called Alley-Oop. Alley-Oop is a lead gen service, but they're a lot more than that. They do their SDRs focus on getting you conversations and meetings that are high quality. They do the SDR job the right way. They learn your company. They build campaigns that are multi-channel. They join your ICP's ecosystem. They comment on the social posts. They personalize campaigns. They do outreach. They start conversations. And their goal is to set up quality meetings for you with the right buyer. And that's what you want. They're less expensive than you hiring an SDR. And the best thing of all about them is that once you've started to use their resources and they're being successful, the company LU will allow you to hire those resources and then start your SDR lead gen function in-house from that seed. And so those are the 4 things I like early in the technology stack. I don't like a lot of other technology for being early because it just tends to convolute, right? Intent software, you're not looking to chase intent. That's the majority of that market that's not yours. You're looking to create it. You're not trying to find interest. You're looking to create interest. You're not trying to find curiosity. You're looking to create curiosity. And so you want the products and the infrastructure and the technologies and the processes and people that are going to allow you to do that. In the end, if you think about the market as those innovators and early adopters, you'll avoid most of the traps. If you hire fractional resources that have been there before in marketing, in sales, in lead gen in particular, you'll have a much greater chance of success and scale. And if you automate those things in your CRM, you'll also have a greater chance of success and scale. So I appreciate all the time you spent today listening. John, you want to talk a little bit about leveraging the CRM and how they can scale with AI and the CRM?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things. We always advocate the crawl, walk, run approach. Salesforce and HubSpot have free versions. I mean, you can start there. But the foundation is important, right? You don't want to have to recalibrate your sales process down the road. It should start with a proper sales process and stay there. You also want to avoid a rip and replace if you can. There's a lot of SMB CRMs out there, but they're not going to scale. So it's critical you pick the right one. And AI is here. I mean, I've been as cynical as most people on AI, especially coming from the Salesforce world. They started talking about it 5 years ago and it didn't do anything. Now it saves your salespeople a lot of time. Now, it is not going to replace them. I mean, the salesperson being a real person is I believe sincerely will always be that way. But all the tasks that are so time consuming, whether it be researching a prospect or automatically sending out an email sequence that's targeted to what they express interest in, when they visit your website, all the way through to creating quotes, all those things that take so much time for your salespeople. We could knock that down to from hours to minutes. So I'm more bullish now than I ever have been on the AI features. They're real pragmatic, tactical tools now.
Indeed. The key on AI is this: AI that helps your salespeople think better is good AI. AI that your salespeople allow to think for them is not good AI. You want to use AI to get people to think better, respond better, and make better ultimate decisions. And AI has done a lot to do that. So if anyone has any questions or wants to discuss any of what you've seen today, my calendar is in the chat. Feel free to schedule a 30-minute call. You'll also get a follow-up from us in the next couple days that will include this podcast and an invitation to learn more.
Yeah, and last thing, if you enjoyed what you saw today, the recording's available immediately. Feel free to repost that to your own feed, and we'd really appreciate it.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of this nice summer day.